Alright, so couple really good descriptions of this recognition in the comments here. So I'll read this one out then. So this is in response to the reply that I made to a particular comment talking about this recognition being carried by the sensory experience, specifically music, and that whole emotional landscape, that emotional memory flavour that I was talking about, that completely transcends the small personal identity of the mind, and is much more based in energetically in the body, let's say, or in the senses, not just isolated to the cognitive story or the thought-based narrative self. So Amanda says, "Thank you so much for answering my questions. It did remind me of this very young, free self that I had, where I was so enjoying the music and almost having this direct connection with the source." So there's very much a sense of memories from childhood, memories from before this thought-driven entity constructed its conditioning to a degree of solidity. And that's usually in young childhood, when we have a connection to this, simply because the identity structure hasn't solidified to any great extent. I remember describing something similar after the initial recognition, that was like the memories of the past joined up, but they all joined up here and now, so almost like transcended time, in that it brought the emotional experience of the past, of my whole life, childhood, all to this single moment, and it was all expressed right here. So I can really relate to that. Back to the comment, it was like knowing that all things were already perfect, and so a gift from me to me. I saw somehow that the I that experienced hearing that song and enjoying it as a young child is the same exact I that was here now, and that no time has passed at all, and that all of the beautiful and hard and seemingly good or bad things that have happened or were happening to me was absolutely purified in this energy. It was the knowing that the love that I always am seeing is always here. It was such absolute redemption of any topic or subject my mind would bring up, would be immediately covered in this loving knowing that all things are interconnected, and there is nothing separate, nothing good, nothing bad, nothing but this. So You see what I mean now when I say it's all here? It's all right here. All of it is right here. None of it is away from this. None of it is separate from this. Even the memories, even the thoughts, the projections, the patterns of conditioning that express here, that are seemingly activated by timeline. Now you can see exactly what I mean by that it's all here, and it's so simple, it's so obvious. And and the purifying love that you describe is the fundamental quality of reality, is that you're experiencing. And it might be overt in contrast to the state, let's say state of the condition of identification. But what you're experiencing now with that redemptive love, that energy, is what I'm always talking about. That is the nature of reality. That is what you are. Maybe the contrast will diminish and it will become more stable and more normal as those patterns fall away. But what you're experiencing is what I'm always talking about, is this recognition, the time transcendent, the recognition of yourself as what you actually are, not the story, not the past, not the future, not a separate discrete entity living in the head made of thoughts, but this. And you're doing a very good job of explaining it, describing it, because it's such a hard thing to describe. But you'll also be able to see that the descriptions don't matter at all, because what you're describing can't be touched by description. It's fantastic. This. And it's a gift to me, from me. Yeah, which is, you are you. So isn't that the greatest gift ever? Because you don't have to attain anything. You don't have to find anything separate from yourself. It's here anyway. It's you anyway. It's such a massive relief. Such a massive relief that it's always been right here. Everything that we were seeking was an attempt to move away from this. But ultimately we were seeking what we are anyway. We were seeking this. We were what was sought. And moving away from that was never going to get us closer to it. Back to listening to the song and seeing that my little girl self is not the real me, but neither is the current me. But that the awareness or love that is already and always here is the real self and is never not there. Yeah. I had to actually leave the gym. I was working out at the time, and the love energy, bracket, sorry I don't know how to say it, I know what you mean, started to make my whole body vibrate. It lasted hours. It's not that intense now, but I can definitely bring it back, and it is so enjoyable and a new hobby for me as well. So awesome. So that's the Kundalini thing that people talk about, the energetic rush that you get. For me, it came a bit spaced out in bits. It didn't come. Some people get a huge blast of that all at once. For me, it was kind of in little bits like that. So I know what you mean. It's at the energetic level. It's at a visceral level. It's like rewires your experience of yourself, and your experience of yourself is believed to be this separate body. So that barrier has been broken at an energetic level, and there's an energetic side effect of that happens, and that's this Kundalini thing that people talk about. So do you now have access to this? Is it just there now that you've seen it, now that you've woken up? The awakening thing has happened for you. The event's not the important part, although it's amazing. It's, do you now have access to that? Is it just here? And is it obvious that it's just here? That is where to orient yourself full on, because the patterns will come back, they'll return, they'll seem to obscure it. No, I could be wrong. That's just speculation, but in my experience, they come back. They seem to obscure it. You get this half in, half out, this back and forth, or this up and down. In the traditions, it's called the arising and the passing. These different phases that you go through of clarity and then obscuration. Does anyone know if obscuration is a word? Because I think I might have just made that up. You know what I mean, though? You said you can bring it back. Is it obvious to you now in your experience? Is it just there? And, it being just there and that being obvious is what people refer to as the permanent change, the perceptual shift. Because before it wasn't obvious to you, it was maybe somewhere else, or you were trying to get it. And then when you realise that what you're trying to get is just here, that's the permanent shift. That's the awakening. That's the point of no return, or stream entry, or whatever you call it. I talked about this in my very early videos, although the language I used might have been different than I would use now, but it's just here, it's you, and it's simple. And what comes in and makes it look complicated, makes it look like something else, there is something to attain, is just a story that feels like you, which you've now seen through. And I find it interesting that you were exercising and listening to music, because I do feel that doing something you enjoy, I had a lot of non-dual experiences training, running, exercising, because that connection to the senses, to the body, that attention there is a form of meditation, and that rhythmic or attentive condition of attention moved the mental self, the mind's narrative, into the background. So this was in the foreground, and then I had all these mad experiences. The same with music. What you described there is so beautiful, because it's you've tapped into what I described in the previous video, this deep version of yourself, which is emotions based, which entirely transcends this limited story. And you've tapped into that emotional memory, let's say, and that's softened the barrier between, or completely obliterated, it seems, the barrier between past self and now, separate self in time. All these barriers of separation that are imposed by this narrative, this framework, this story of me, how I'm separate, how there are these different times in my life, is completely bypassed with you tapping into that emotional memory. And I know exactly what you mean. All gaps close. It all comes here. The whole thing's obviously here, and there's a massive relief, a massive integration, a massive release, a massive recognition, and that recognition, I don't know if you experience any of this, the fear of death takes a big hit, but equally it brings all that to the surface. It did for me. Maybe this might come after, but clearly that you've recognised as yourself is transcendent of time is transcendent of separation, birth and death. And that's what I described in the previous video of these, not cognitive memories, but the emotional memories that are here, that go way beyond the story of time, the story of this mind body, this limited entity. And for me, pretty much solved the question of why can't I remember anything before this lifetime. That didn't make sense anymore, because you could say I did or I didn't need to simultaneously. So that brought, tapping into this emotional landscape brought a lot of stuff up to the surface, and then that had to be moved through post-awakening. And that's still going on. So it's not like a linear progression like we would usually frame it in mind. It's a integration of this recognition into your immediate experience constantly, infinitely, right now. And what's peripheral to that, what the relative or energetic conditioning of this body mind then starts to come apart, starts to dissolve, and it's very immediate, it's very physical. It feels very physical, visceral, and sensory, emotional, feelings based. And then at a certain point, for me, it brought up, and this might not happen at all for you, brought up a lot of fear, existential fear, and that was kind of the very short-lived bits of this, which was kind of alternating with interconnectedness, integration, bliss, peace, love, etc. And it just continues and continues to expand, continues to become more mysterious, but at the same time more simple. This aliveness, this awareness becomes more and more fascinating, more and more incredible, less and less tangible for the mind, and it just keeps going. It keeps going infinitely. The contrast does become more subtle between the relative story of the character and all its problems, and then this that you've recognised as yourself. That contrast is heavy at the start, and it diminishes. It becomes more normal, but the fascination, the mystery, the mind-blowingness of it, of just life in general, of this experience, this awakeness, this aliveness, continues to become more and more profound, and that at least in my experience never goes away. That redemptive love that you talked about is, I would describe it as, by the very fact that this exists, it is made of pure love, pure contentment, pure peace, completely liberated. And anything that isn't that is an illusion. And that goes all the way, and it becomes quite unpalatable to talk about if you were to project into situations and say that this is love, you know, at that absolute level. That can be unpalatable, but at least in my experience so far, it goes deep. It goes very deep, and it just continues to deepen, so that there's no, like you mentioned, the distinctions between good and bad. It's clear that in this that you're talking about, that those don't exist. It's not possible. It's entirely neutral, entirely transcendent of opposites, of dualities, of good or bad, of palatable or unpalatable, and so on. Let me see this again. You mentioned purified. Everything is purified. All the complexities, all the stories, all the uncertainty and the doubt disappears in this. It dissolves in this because it's self-confirmingly beyond the doubt. And once you see it, let's say, once this is recognised, it then starts to make the whole awakening thing seem like a bit of a piss take, a bit of a joke, because you see the imagery, you see the way it's talked about, and the way I talk about it, the mind frames it as something fantastic in the future. The mind frames it as a something. It doesn't quite know what it is, but it frames it in its own idea. And then now that you've recognised this, you might be able to see that it's nothing like that. It's nothing like that. It's so much more obvious than that. So much more. I can't really describe it. It's just not what the mind thinks it is. It's surprising. It's really surprising. Yeah, it's really surprising. And all the non-dual speakers, the teachers, the spiritual teachers and so on, it makes the whole thing seem kind of, it's like a one big inside joke. It's quite funny. It's like a cosmic joke. And then you really appreciate how the mind can't see this. The mind can't see outside of its own framings, its own filters. It can't see outside of itself. It's so weird that way. So now you have access to the true direct experience of yourself, and then it's just enjoying that hobby that you talked about. And it's the most simple hobby. You don't need anything, you don't need to buy anything. It's here, it's this, and it's incredibly enjoyable, and it starts to become the most enjoyable thing you can do or not do. Is just be at peace. All of life then becomes a meditation. All of life then becomes clear, and it's all clear here and right now. And it becomes more and more immediate, and as it becomes more immediate, this sensory experience becomes more clear, more vivid. In the Buddhist traditions, they talk about it being luminous, kind of light reference maybe, but it is luminous. We'd be missing this whilst stuck in the mind. This vibrant, immense sensory experience in all its nuances and all its subtlety and all its overt clarity. And you can just go more and more deeply into that. And as you go deeper into that, let's say, the mind starts to let go of its framings. The framings that say, I am separate, you are separate, this is separate, the world is this size, I am this size, that's over there, I am over here, that starts there and ends there, so on and so on. There are separate things. Now, this is just me poorly describing what's referred to as non-duality, no separation, and you hear people talk about it as well, but this is the point. After this is when the mind can't follow anymore. It can't frame it into I am the witness or eternal awareness or anything like that. These framings are left behind, and what's left is something that's inexplicable, inexplicably beautiful, untouchable by positions or concept or the mind or belief or doubt. So paradoxical, and in that you can just leave the self behind. Takes some courage, but then you see that the courage isn't the courage in a personal sense, and you really can lose yourself in this experience. such that the experiencer is forgotten about. But that's fantastic. I'm really glad to hear that you've that you that you've had this recognition to such a degree of clarity. It's fantastic. So I've had to cut there because I've run out of time, but I'll leave it there for now, and I'll talk to you next time. The comments are really good, by the way, so keep them coming, and I'll respond to as many as I can and tell me your experiences, because I just like to hear the experiences of the wisdom that is expressed by you, and maybe a different form of language, a different way of expressing, a different flavour of description would be helpful, and I'll read it out.